Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and welcome back to me talking about movies. It's been a while since I talked about movies on this channel. Last time I talked about movies was when I covered a bunch of 2024 Oscar-nominated movies. A video in which I said I was gonna do a follow-up, which I never did, because I got sick and didn't have time to watch the other Oscar-nominated movies. Maybe see this video as an unofficial follow-up, because I will talk about one or two other Oscar-nominated movies. I just thought I'm really in the mood to talk about movies again because it's something I really do love talking about. So today I'm just going to talk about 10 recent movies and or TV shows or miniseries that I have watched, just so we can talk about them if I thought they were any good, and maybe you've seen some of them as well, and we can talk about them in the comments. So let's go. Let's start off with something fun, and when I say fun, I mean so bad it's funny. Namely, the final movie in the After series, After Everything. I enjoy movies like this because I get a good laugh out of poor YA or new adult romance movies. I love shit like that. I will annoy my girlfriend with movies like this all the time because I just love laughing at movies like this, to be honest. Like, if I'm having a bad day or I need something to switch my brain or I need something to laugh at, I will watch movies like this. Like, they're a lot of fun to just sit down with friends or with a partner and then just have a good laugh about them. So yeah, After Everything was the final movie in this series. Oh my god, was it hilarious. Like, this movie is, I don't even know what this is. This was basically just a 90-minute Harden pity party. Tessa is basically not in this movie whatsoever. So if you were into this series because of the couple, why? The couple isn't even good, it's very toxic, and if you watch this final movie, Tessa isn't even in it. So this is mostly about Harden Scott, you know, our bad boy who's now a famous author, and he goes off to find himself, to find inspiration to write his book, and he goes to Portugal, and there he decides to check up on his old ex-girlfriend, who he did the same shit with that he did with Tessa and the first one, namely that he basically sort of like took her virginity for a bet, and then the video of them doing it was released to the public, and she got publicly shamed, and Harden never had to deal with any of the consequences, so of course she hates him, and then he decides to go hit her up while he's in Portugal, because she lives there, and you're like, why do you think this is a good idea? And of course, she ends up more or less forgiving him, and they're becoming friends, and there's even a hint at that she might still like him, and you're like, why? This man is the worst. And then it all kind of culminates in a wedding where Harden sees Tessa again. Like, Tessa is in this movie for 5 minutes, and the other like 2 or 3 minutes are basically just like flashback compilations from the other movies in the series. And then at the end they have the audacity for them to have like a conversation that lasts 5 minutes, and at the end of that conversation, Harden and Tessa decide to get married, and then we get like a flash forward to them having kids and being happy, and Tessa wears a really awful wig, and you're like, what the fuck have I just watched? So, excellent movie series for if you want a good laugh, and naturally that it got like half a star out of 5 on Letterboxd. But honestly, hilarious. It's a series I had a lot of fun with. This is like excellent peak stupid YA romance. Love it. For the next movie, let's go back to some very serious stuff. Let's go back to some Oscar movies I didn't manage to cover back when I did the first video about Oscar movies. Let's talk about The Zone of Interest. The Zone of Interest is a German language movie about the family which ran the Auschwitz concentration camp. And this movie is essentially a character study of this family, especially of the husband and wife who live in that house that is essentially located right next to the concentration camp. And as you can guess from the theme, from the topic, it's a very heavy movie to watch, purposefully so. And honestly, this movie is fantastic. Like, obviously, it deals with an utterly horrible and, like, awkwardly or strangely interesting theme of this family that lives there in this very bizarre scenario where you basically spend this entire movie being with this family who are having a more or less good life. They live in a very nice home with a beautiful garden, but their house is surrounded by a wall. And occasionally in the background during scenes, you would see smoke coming from somewhere, from the horizon. And throughout the movie, you occasionally hear screams, someone shouting, screaming in utter pain. You would hear gunshots, stuff like that, throughout the entire movie while the family is just going about their daily life, essentially. And that is such a horrifyingly bizarre atmosphere that runs throughout the entire movie, which is created perfectly via a honestly wonderful sound design that's honestly very, very haunting. Like, this movie is very subtle and, I don't want to say quiet, but it's not loud. But the sound mixing and the sound design of this adds to everything, because you have this relatively quiet and a heartfelt atmosphere of this normal family, but in the background you would always hear the horrible deeds are being committed in the concentration camp that you never really see, but always constantly hear. And this creates a really interesting, off-putting atmosphere while you watch the entire movie. You feel off throughout the entire movie. You feel really off just watching this family, because you know horrible stuff is going on, and you know these are awful people, but these awful people are also just sort of like living their normal life. Like, what's normal life for them? And you get involved in their affairs and in their relationships. And honestly, it was just really interesting. It also has like one or two, not really twists, but interesting aspects in there you might not expect, I think, but that do really add to like the general theme of the movie. And honestly, if you haven't watched it yet, definitely go check it out. I think it's very much worth a watch, especially if you're in for more subtle and quieter character studies. Next movie I want to talk about was another Oscar-nominated movie, namely Poor Things. Now, Poor Things, I was actually aware of previously, because as it turned out, I have actually read the book. I just didn't realize that, because the whole time when I saw this movie somewhere, I would see promos for it. I was like, Poor Things sounds so familiar. And haven't I read this story somewhere? And I checked my bookshop. I was like, oh yeah, no, because I've read the book the movie is based on. So Poor Things is about a young woman who was essentially artificially created. She is born with the body of an adult woman, but with the mind of a child, essentially. And she grows up very quickly, not really fully understanding the complexities of the world, but wanting to like go out there and explore not only herself, but also the world, while she also gets involved with some not so good, but also some better people, men, in her life. So she starts a relationship with a man who's very much not an ideal boyfriend. He's sort of like, they sort of like run away to explore the world, and she ends up upsetting him. He leaves her, and she's sort of off to fight for herself and discover herself. And it's a lot about, naturally, it's a lot about womanhood, about what it means to be a woman, how women are being treated in society, how they see themselves, how men see them, how women have to make a name for themselves or have to fight for their own rights, whereas men will just treat them in any way that suits them, but women just sort of have to take it silently, and the main character learns what what it means to basically live in that kind of society, but also being like, yeah, no, but why should I have to accept this? Why is this the way it is? And I honestly really, really like this movie. This is essentially what I wanted Barbie to sort of be, essentially, like going by the themes and the topics this movie is about, since it is very much about what it means to be a woman and all that. But this plays with those issues with a lot, added with a lot more wackiness and weirdness and a lot of more R-rated stuff. So naturally, there's a lot of stuff that has to do with sex, sexuality, nakedness, gender-related issues. But I think never in a way where it feels exploitative. It always feels very much on purpose when the main character has anything sexual going on or is naked or something. It always feels like there's a point to it. Like the movie is very clever in, I think, its use of sex and sexuality. Also added by the fact that this is set in there's a heightened sense of reality almost in this world, a sense of almost like magical realism. Like this, especially the set design in this is very interesting, I think, where it will at first maybe feel like a normal place, but there's stuff in there that feels odd. There's immediately stuff in there where you can tell, oh, this is like our world, but not quite. Like something is different about it. And the general set design, production design adds to that wonderfully, I think. But the acting or the way the characters interact never feels out of place. It feels very much natural within the world itself. So I had a lot of fun with this. I thought the themes were explored in a very interesting way. I ended up, I think, also giving this, I feel like, 4 out of 5. Like, it was on the same level as Zone of Interest for me, where I overall had a good time with it. Honestly, the only flaws I can attribute to this is that maybe it was a bit too long in some places. Some scenes felt a little drawn out, or some scenes felt a bit too rushed. But otherwise, I had a lot of fun with this, and I can honestly recommend this to everyone. Next up, I would like to talk about a miniseries that has gained a lot of attention on the internet. Namely, I would like to talk about Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. Now, this is a documentary that has got a lot of attention in the last couple of weeks and months, because this is essentially a documentary about what's been going on at Nickelodeon with Dan Schneider and all of that stuff. So I've been interested in this ever since I read Jeanette McCurdy's book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, a book which, if you haven't read it, you should definitely read it. It was my reading highlight of last year. Fantastic novel. So going on from that, I was really interested into getting into this documentary, because this is some stuff we do need to talk about this more often, by like just how horribly children have been and still are treated in not only Hollywood, but like the general acting bubble, especially in America, because the way these children were looked after, or more likely not looked after, is honestly baffling. What kind of atmosphere there was at these sets, and that minors were exposed to this. Like some kids, like as young as like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, but also slightly older, that they were exposed to like utterly unsafe and horrendous conditions that somehow no one checked in on, and that allowed people like Dan Schneider and others to take advantage of. Like this series, this documentary goes really deep, like especially on some dark stuff. So it does talk about child abuse and pedophilia and all that. It honestly goes to some really, really dark places. It feels a tiny bit exploitative here and there, especially with some of the stuff, how it's interpreted by some of the experts on the documentary. But overall, you get the general gist of it, and I think it does address some really important themes. I'm glad that it's not afraid to like really point the fingers at some people in this, not only Dan Schneider, but also at some of the other people that Schneider basically allowed to be on his sets, who then ended up really like also sexually abusing minors. Like the biggest thing in this documentary spoiler, I guess, but not really. It's been talked about everywhere. Like the big thing in this documentary is that Drake Bell came out in this documentary and said that when he was young, when he was a minor, he was sexually abused by one of the people who worked on these Nickelodeon shows. And it was honestly, regardless of all that other shit that Drake Bell has done, just like this one thing now in this documentary, just hearing him talk about that honestly felt really heavy, and kudos to him that he felt that he was finally strong enough to talk about it, because honestly that is a really, really big thing. I can only imagine how hard it must be to talk about stuff like this. I do wish they had, in regards to Drake Bell, highlighted some of his own faults throughout his career a little bit more. It does get addressed by himself in one or two sentences. However, I wished the documentary had pointed a bit more of a finger at his own issues, personally speaking. But nevertheless, I thought this was a very interesting documentary if you're willing to like deal with the issues that are in this show. I think you will get a very interesting a documentary that maybe goes a bit too far, is a tad too long, exploitative here and there, but I think nevertheless addresses some important issues. And I think I also ended up giving this like a 4 out of 5, so definitely worth a watch. Next up, I want to talk about a movie that actually my girlfriend made me watch, and I'm glad she did, because the movie I want to talk about is Searching. So this is a drama thriller movie about a father who is trying to find his daughter. And the shtick of this movie is that the entire film is told through screens. We never get a shot that is made with like a proper camera, no normal cinematography or anything like that. Everything is told via screens, via a phone screen, via webcam, via social media website, via texting. All of that, the entire movie happens like that. And I was a bit nervous going into it, thinking, how could that possibly carry an entire narrative? But honestly, it does, and it works really, really well, under the assumption that a father actually knows how social media and all this tech stuff works. But aside, I thought this was really, really interesting. Like, the entire shtick with the whole it's told through screens works really, really well, because this is about a father who tries to find his daughter, and daughter is very active on social media, and the dad basically struggled to, in the beginning, to connect with his daughter before she goes missing, because the mum has died, so they've had a strained relationship ever since then. So when she goes missing, of course, at first he's like worried that she might have run away, or that she might have broken off contact with him. But then as the story goes on, he realizes, what if something has actually, like something serious has actually happened to her? And we see him going into this deep dive of him just trying to find out what happened to his daughter, who his daughter even actually was, as he feels like he never really understood her ever since the mom died. And we see him sort of trying to figure out who his daughter is via him going to her social media, trying to figure out if she has friends, trying to talk to people who know her. And he's sort of discovering what his daughter is actually thinking about, what's been going on with her. Like, he discovers some things about her that he never thought were possible. While at the same time, there's just this general sense of dread and thrill going on, because you are worried, just as he is, that is she dead? We don't know. Is she just missing? Did she just go AFK, basically? We have no idea. Just like the dad, we're sitting there at the edge of the seat just trying to figure out what has actually happened. The reveal, I think, at the end, while a little bit too movie-ish, personally, I think was nevertheless interesting, and ended up giving this whole thing a satisfying ending. I honestly didn't expect that I would enjoy this as much as I did, but honestly, if you're on the lookout for a drama thriller movie which is done a bit differently, go and check out this movie. Next up, I would like to talk about a movie by Sam Esmail, the man who created Mr. Robot, one of my favorite TV shows of all time. It's So naturally, I was very excited to get into this one. I'm talking about Leave the World Behind. And what can I say? What the hell? What the hell is this film? So this is a movie about a family that decides to go on a spontaneous holiday. They rent out a holiday home away from the big city. They go there. Once they're there, we don't exactly know what it is, but something seems to have happened because suddenly technology isn't working anymore, the internet isn't working anymore, they can't contact anyone. Then there's a general alarm like that is being published everywhere around the country, just like something seemingly has happened, but we don't know exactly what, and they're stuck there in this holiday house. And then they are visited by the man who owns this house. He comes there with his daughter and is like, we don't have anywhere else to go and we would like to stay here. And the family's like, okay, can we trust them? So this is the general premise. It's a bit hard to describe because we all know Sam Esmail, especially if you've watched Mr. Robot. This man likes to do weird, complicated shit. And with this one, I didn't really get on with it. I ended up giving this movie 2.5 stars because I could see interesting elements to it. Like there's a general sense of tension that I enjoy that really leaves you at the edge of your seat wondering what is going on. Are the families gonna betray each other? Is someone gonna get murdered? Are we gonna find out what has actually happened? What's the state of emergency? Is it like an alien invasion? Is it a terrorist attack? Is it something else? Like, you really do have this tension and those thoughts in the back of your mind this entire time. It's just, I feel like the movie ends up sort of going what I felt nowhere. At the end, I felt very dissatisfied because I felt like I'm basically gonna know just as much at the end as I did at the beginning, and I hate that feeling in stories when, like, essentially this was all very vague and mysterious and strange and wackiness, but without ever really giving us any kind of answer whatsoever as to what was actually behind everything or what was going on with anyone. And I didn't really like that. I do enjoy some aspects of it. I think that the character dynamics and the chemistries are really interesting, especially once the father and his daughter enter this whole scenario, because there's definitely like a theme of like racism as well, because the family who goes to stay at the home is white, and the mother, who I did not like at all, she had major Karen vibes. She's very like on edge, and then the man who owns the house comes there and he's black. And immediately the mom of the family is very worried about, suspicious when they're like, okay, this is my house and we didn't know we didn't have anywhere else to go, so this is where we came. Can we come here? This is my house, and I know you're staying here, and I'm sorry, but can we stay? And the mom is immediately like, well, what are these people doing here? Like, no, and I feel a bit weird about having strangers stay at my home. And like, yeah, even if this is emergency and blah 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 blah, and you immediately get this vibe of, is she saying this because they're black and she's white? Like, there's immediately like this kind of chemistry introduced within the film, which sort of runs throughout the entire thing. Also because the movie doesn't entirely like fully always let you in on what's the dad's, like the owner's feelings of everything. Maybe there is something suspicious about them. We don't really know. Just like the entire movie is this feeling of something weird, something strange. We never fully know what's going on. And this can be interesting. In this case, it wasn't. I was left disappointed. I could see the potential for some interesting stuff happening in this, but it just didn't. So I was left disappointed. Next up, I would like to talk about the one rewatch I would like to mention here. Namely, I rewatched Interstellar by Christopher Nolan. So Christopher Nolan, big fan of him. As you may or may not remember, Oppenheimer, my favorite movie of last year, one of the best movies I've seen in a long time. And ever since then, I've like sporadically rewatched some of Christopher Nolan's other movies to sort of see do I also like some of his other films as much. Some of them are very much hits, some of them are very much misses. And Interstellar, I had seen before. However, when I first watched this movie, it was like, I don't quite remember, like 6 or 7 years ago. I watched it with my parents. And at the time, I think I didn't fully get it. Like, I didn't hate it. I think initially I was like, I don't know, like, yeah, 3 out of 5 was fine, but it was a bit unnecessarily complicated and way too long, and yeah. So that was sort of my first opinion when I first watched it years ago. Now I rewatched it with my girlfriend a couple of weeks ago, and mind blown, people, mind blown. 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like, what was I even thinking back then? What was 20-year-old baby John even thinking? Interstellar is very much a Christopher Nolan movie. It's a very long, overly complex, sci-fi-esque story about the nature of time. We all know Christopher Nolan loves that shit. But honestly, so worth it. First up, the general story, while yes, unnecessarily complicated in some bits, comes together at the end to form such a creative and heartbreaking story that will make you cry. I swear to God, it will make you cry at least 1 or 2 times while you watch this. So in general, it's a story about this father, played by Matthew McConaughey, who used to be this really great pilot or astronaut, and the world is at the brink of, not quite extinction, but you know, it's this heightened sense of what we have now, this sense of dread that, you know, resources are running out, we need to find different places so humanity can survive out there, not just on planet Earth. And Matthew McConaughey is recruited to lead one of these operations to go and find a different planet where humanity can live. In order to do that, he has to abandon his family, his 2 kids, especially his daughter, who he has a very close connection with, and she doesn't want him to leave, but he decides to leave. So he goes on this journey with a team of astronauts, one of them played by Anne Hathaway, who sort of plays this other main character, and they go off and try and find multiple planets. Problem is, time and space work differently the further they travel. So for example, they end up being on a planet where 1 year on the planet means 7 days. 1 year on the planet means 7 years on planet Earth. So there's some real time pressure to act fast on that planet, because the more time they spend there, the more time will have passed on Earth, and the more horrible things will happen on Earth, and the older Matthew McConaughey's kids will become. So there is this general sense of pressure that runs throughout the whole movie, where Matthew McConaughey wants to save the world. He wants to be there for his daughter at the same time. He doesn't want to disappoint her because he promised he would come back, but at the same time there's just like weird sense of pressure that they can't, time pressure that they can't do anything about, and creates this very warped sense of time and space and reality that, yes, honestly does boggle your mind a bit. Maybe you won't fully understand everything the first time you watch it. I certainly didn't, looking back. But this adds to the overall complexity and colorfulness of the movie, I think, also because not only is the production design of this brilliant, as it is with almost every Christopher Nolan movie, I would argue, it's also majorly supported by the absolutely beautiful score. Hans Zimmer knocks it out of the park yet again. There's a reason why this man is my favorite movie composer. I just love Hans Zimmer. Why is this man so good at what he does? There are so many pieces of music in this that really elevate so many scenes in this movie that are already great, also by the acting. Like Matthew McConaughey and Hathaway do a lot of heavy lifting here and really elevate this material even more. And then they're supported by this really, really amazing music that just makes you feel things, man. Like, I think I'm not quite sure if it's called like the Interstellar Ballad or something, that like there's a piece of music, I think, that goes on for like 10-15 minutes maybe, I have no idea, that is like a main theme for the movie. If you did just like go and listen to that, gorgeous, beautiful, love it. And I was left an emotional wreck when I finished this movie, and I honestly don't understand how I could ever give this anything lower than 4.5, because this is gorgeous. This is definitely a movie you should watch if you haven't seen it yet, and it left me heartbroken. Let's talk about something more fun again. Let's talk about more stupid YA romance movies. Let's talk about Netflix's newest one, The Tearsmith. I had no idea that this movie existed, and then my girlfriend told me about it and was like, oh, this is another stupid YA romance movie, we need to watch it together, it's hilarious. And I was like, yes, sign me the hell up for this. So this is an, I think, Italian movie based on a book. And it's the story about a girl and a boy who grow up in this really awful orphanage where they are abused by the headmistress, essentially. And eventually she ends up being adopted by two loving parents who then also decide, of course, they also want to spontaneously adopt the other handsome bad boy in the orphanage. So they both get adopted into this family, and awkward and uncomfortable romance ensues between these two, while there is also some school shenanigans going on. And honestly, this movie is so weird. This movie, when you look at it, feels like it was made in 2010, but somehow it's a recent production, and you're looking at it and you're wondering how. How did this happen? Just how? Somehow this ends up not being as awful as some of the other YA romance movies I watched. Don't get me wrong, this is still awful. Like, I think I gave this, what did I give this? Like 2, no, not even 2, 1.5 stars out of 5. God awful, but at least there are elements to the stories and the characters in this where you're like, this could potentially be interesting if it wasn't involved in the really stupid YA romance plot. Like the whole stuff with the orphanage and that they were abused there, and this whole messed up system that they were involved in when they were younger. That's really interesting. However, that's not what the movie is dealing with. The movie is dealing with this stupid, slightly creepy, weird romance that develops between these two kids who are now essentially siblings, adopted siblings, but still feels a tiny bit weird. Also, what I can recommend to you is, or not recommend, depending on how much you want to laugh, the English dub for this movie is hilariously bad. Like, we watched it in the English dub just cause we wanted to laugh, because normally I like to watch things in the original with subtitles, but my girlfriend was like, no, we're watching the English dub because it sounds fucking hilarious. And it does. It honestly does. You know when you like watch a movie or a TV show or an anime, and you can just hear and see that it's dubbed. You know what I mean? It just feels dubbed. Also very badly, like just going by lip movement and the words they're using, it just feels and sounds dubbed, and it's hilarious, honestly. So yeah, if you're like on the lookout for a YA romance movie that feels like very 2010 Twilight vibes, but bad, because compared to this, Twilight's actually kind of fun, go and watch it. Absolutely hilarious. You will have a good laugh. Next up, a movie I've been wanting to watch for a long time. Namely, we are going to talk about the Hunger Games prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Now, I have not read the book this movie is based on. I am, however, familiar with the original Hunger Games series. Fan of it. It's actually one of the few YA series that I honestly actively enjoy and think is good. So I was interested to finally get into this prequel, which I think had a lot of varying opinions. Like, some people really, really enjoyed this and also the book, but some people were like, this is god awful and shouldn't even be included in the Hunger Games canon. So I was curious to get into this, and I ended up feeling very meh about it. I think I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 on my letterbox, because I just didn't know how to feel about it. So this short version, this is the story, or the prequel to Hunger Games, which deals with President Snow when he wasn't president yet, when he was Coriolanus Snow, a young man who was one of the first coaches in the Hunger Games. He ends up coaching the girl from District 12. They sort of fall in love. How serious that is not entirely clear. And once he's helped her do that, he gets involved in some of the politics that have to do with Panem and especially with the dealings of District 12. So why did I feel weird about this? First off, I'm not the biggest fan of the Coriolanus Snow character anyway, and I feel like this movie didn't give us enough in terms of explaining to us how he became this conniving, cold son of a bitch psychopath that he is in the Hunger Games series. I also wasn't entirely sure what the movie wanted me to think of his relationship with the girl from District 12, because at times the movie felt like it was trying to be like, oh no, they are seriously in love, and this is supposed to be a romance story, and I'm supposed to root for these characters, but at the same time, it felt like, is he just playing with her feelings? Is he just taking advantage of her? Because he definitely is to a certain degree, but I couldn't tell, and I'm sure this is to a certain degree on purpose, I just couldn't tell if the movie wanted me to seriously think that they were in love at some point, or not. I just really, I couldn't get the vibe the movie wanted me to get from this. And it didn't help that I was ever so slightly annoyed with the girl character from District 12, who, as you might notice, whose name I don't even remember. So she's like this country singer, essentially, who lives in District 12 but isn't from there. So she's more like from a nomad culture who travels around a lot but ended up in District 12 and then ends up being chosen for the Hunger Games. So there's a lot of singing in this movie. A lot of singing, which honestly to me was a bit annoying at times. Like, I'm a fan of musicals, but I got annoyed throughout this movie where she starts singing and I was like, oh my god, shut up. Yeah, I know you're a singer. Yeah, I know. I don't know. I didn't vibe with it also because I didn't feel like the songs or the genres, the types of songs that were in this didn't really vibe all that well with the general setting of the Hunger Games in District 12. I don't know, I just didn't think it like mixed well, at least to me. I don't know. Also, the pacing of this movie felt slightly off. I think they should have made this 2 movies because this movie basically deals with Hunger Games and then it does more stuff after Hunger Games are done. So there's an entire story that takes place after Hunger Games. And I feel like it should have ended after the Hunger Games and then they should have made a second movie. I think that would have made more sense because you feel like when the Hunger Games end, that's sort of like the high point, the finale of the story. But then no, the movie still goes on. You're like, okay. Also, I totally get that this is like a prequel to the Hunger Games, so the Hunger Games in this one are still sort of like underdeveloped in comparison as to how they're run. They still felt a bit underwhelming in terms of how they were designed and how they explored the characters and the tributes chosen, and just like the general plot line of how the Hunger Games themselves unfolded felt a little underwhelming, personally. There were aspects to it that I still liked. I think there's a character in this played by Peter Dinklage who's like the original inventor of the Hunger Games. I thought his character was really interesting, but also lost a lot of potential because I felt like they had something really interesting with his character, but then didn't really do much with him. They did much more with the other character, this lady who runs the games and who sort of mentors Coriolanus Snow throughout the story, and you never really entirely know how much is she actually helping him and how much is she just being a conniving son of a bitch. So there's sort of that going on. There are some interesting plot beats and character beats that I liked, but overall it left me feeling a little confused and feeling a little underwhelmed, disappointed. Like, if you're a fan of the Hunger Games series, give it a watch. If you're curious, maybe don't expect too much, and yeah, like it's not a bad movie, but go into it with some managed expectations. Okay, and the last thing I would like to talk about is another miniseries, namely, I watched Seduced, Inside the Nexium Cult. So my girlfriend is currently reading a book on cultish language, a book I'm really looking forward to reading as well. And in general, we're big fans of cults, so to speak. Like whenever there's a new documentary out about cults on Netflix, we will watch this. Now this is not a Netflix documentary, but it's a documentary that was mentioned in the book my girlfriend is reading, and we got curious about it, and it's really, really interesting. So the Nexium cult started off as like this sort of self-help management program, but then of course it runs much, much deeper than you think, and it ends up being about enslavement and abuse and sex trafficking and non-consensual relationship stuff, branding, a lot of fucked up shit. And this documentary uses the framing of this mother-daughter pairing who both ended up being in the cult. The mother, however, getting out of it quite early before it got weird, essentially. But the daughter was involved very deep. Like, she was in deep. And it took her years to get out of it. And it's essentially, you have essentially these two storylines about the daughter losing herself to this cult, isolating herself more and more from her family, especially from her mother. And this other storyline is about the mother who essentially has to grapple with those feelings of that she's the one who's responsible for introducing her daughter to this cult that's essentially taking her daughter away from her. And then she eventually decides that she just has to get her daughter out of there. And it's her struggle with trying to convince her daughter to leave this cult, and then finding different ways of getting people's attention, trying to get the police involved, trying to get the media involved, just doing everything she can in order to get her daughter out of this very, very dangerous situation. So those are sort of the two parallel running storylines throughout this documentary. I think there were like 4 episodes to it, which I think was a good amount of episodes. Like, it didn't feel too drawn out as some other documentaries about stuff like this tend to do. Netflix has this problem. It felt focused, and I like that it had like this red thread running through, that it was mostly focusing on the daughter and their mother. You also get input from some of the other former members of this cult that got out earlier, how they dealt with the situation, how they perceived this mother-daughter relationship that was going on at the time in the cult, how they saw the head of this group, this abusive man, how they encountered him, what their relationship was with him. And of course you also have the voices of some experts throughout the documentary who give input on, how cults story in, what their language is, what their techniques are, and how some people would get caught up in groups like this, even though they are very intelligent and smart people. Because, and I think is the biggest point of this documentary very much makes the point of saying everyone could get involved in shit like this. Like, the people that get mentioned throughout this documentary were some very smart, intelligent people, some very famous people, even like famous actors and actresses who got involved in this. And I like that it said that this documentary essentially says this could happen to anyone. Don't just say, how could this happen? How could you not see that this was an evil cult? No, this could happen to anyone. Everyone could at some point be susceptible to shit like this. So honestly, thought it was really interesting. I also gave this 4 out of 5. Honestly, the only problems I had with this, that I thought some details could have been explored a bit more, could have been addressed in more depth, while some other elements were drawn out a bit too much here and there, maybe. But honestly, mostly like superficial flaws that I had with this miniseries. So if you're on the lookout for an interesting documentary about cults, I can definitely recommend this one. So that's it for this little recent movie wrap up. video. I hope you enjoyed this. Please do tell me down in the comments below if you have any thoughts and opinions on the movies or miniseries that I mentioned here. And if you have any movie highlights that you would like to talk about, some movies that you've watched recently where you were really impressed by what happened, or maybe there were some movies in there where you thought, holy shit, what did I just watch? Please do tell me down in the comments below what some of your viewing highlights have been this year so far. I would love to hear from you. If you're curious as to what I'm watching, you can follow me on Letterboxd. I document everything I watch on there, also give everything a rating. Occasionally I also type up a review if I feel like it, so go follow me on there. Link to my Letterboxd account is in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done it already, and I'll see all of you very soon. Goodbye.